Hello and welcome to another episode of the Digital Health Hackers podcast. Today I have Ian and David with me, both from a consulting firm, freshEHR. So Ian, David, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Are you first, Ian?
I thank you. So I'm Ian McNicoll. A long time ago, I was a Scottish GP in Glasgow, but I've been working in health informatics for probably 40 years, and working with openEHR specifically over the last 15 years. David.
And
Yep.
David Jobling. My background as a systems analyst, working for local authorities, but moved into the healthcare sector probably around 8 years ago now, where I first met Ian actually, and it was all involved in the open source program at NHS England at the time, but now working as a health and social care informatics specialist at freshEHR.
Amazing. I think Ian, the first time I met you was on Discourse, and I was very new to openEHR, and you were the clinical informatics specialist, and you welcomed a fellow informatician, right? So that was really nice. And I think you are downplaying your introduction quite a bit here. I think you single-handedly have been responsible for a lot of the archetypes in the CGEM. And the clinical modeling and many of these archetypes would not have been the same without your involvement.
Yeah, I'll take some credit. Excuse me, I'm switching my phone off. I'm taking some credit, but actually the person who led most of that work was Heather Leslie. And I learned most of what I know, but yes, certainly contributed a lot to the early archetyping development. And I was also co-chair of the openEHR International, parent group for a while. So yeah, I've been well embedded in this world for quite a number of years.
So coming to the topic of discussion today. So what's going on in the NHS? What is not working, and what are the problems that the NHS is facing? And again, like I was in London a few months ago, and I was talking to my girlfriend who is a practitioner at the NHS, and she was talking about how data just doesn't move, and you spend about an hour just talking to a patient who has already been to another NHS system, just collecting their history, right? So what is going on, and why is it this way?
Well, so let's not go into what's going on with the NHS as an organisation, because that's very political and whatever. But I think I think this is actually a universal problem. I think in some ways we're doing a little worse in the UK. In some ways we're doing a little better, and I'm lucky enough to work internationally, and I quite often get told, "Oh, Ian, why aren't we doing it the way they're doing it in Sweden or Finland or India or whatever?" I don't think anybody is doing this particularly well. There are one or two places, maybe like Singapore, where it's a small community, a small country, where they can do things more cohesively. But actually, this is an international challenge. What makes it always difficult, of course, is that the health information system is always connected to the way that healthcare is delivered. And that comes down to how much is it private sector, how much is it hospital based, how much is it community based. And then, of course, that makes it one of the reasons that it's very hard to scale this up across different countries, to move products from country to country, because so much is about, it's tied into the way that healthcare is delivered, nothing to do with the IT as such. But, this is the universal problem, is that, we even from when I was still practicing medicine, healthcare delivery is very much a team sport. It's not about your organization or my department or your department. A patient's journey, let's say as a cancer patient, crosses, so many different professionals, organizations, and moving information between those different organizations is actually just very, very difficult. Many reasons for that, but it's not a simple, I say nobody's cracked this yet.
No. So for the viewers, who are kind of naive to how the NHS works, what do you think? A lot of people think all of the NHS works on a single system, and they usually ask questions like, what is the EHR that the NHS uses? So what's your answer to that? And again, like David, please.
Yeah, just to touch on the other point before I answer that as well is obviously we've talked about the NHS as a thing, and actually it's more of a it's a large entity made up of multiple organisations with a really long history of having different innovations in there from many years ago when it's very historical. There's a lot there already. And obviously, it's shifting from that to the new innovations is obviously fairly difficult. And like Ian touched on as well, we're obviously talking about not just the healthcare aspects, we're talking about the social care aspects, so where it bleeds across different organisations, not just NHS organisations, but into local authorities, into other community care, and all of that is where you then get all these different organisations trying to have different versions of the same information done in different ways. And obviously we touched there on where some of those problems might lie, and obviously where you have different organisations trying to solve the same problem repeatedly, you get issues where you need to, exactly as you were saying at the beginning, where you're going to need to have individuals who are going to ask the same questions to the patients. And so that patient experience from the patient's point of view is a frustrating, I'll tell the same story again to a different organization about the same sort of stuff. And it is due to all of those, just as Ian touched on, some of the historical reasons around why we ended up getting to where we got to in terms of the organizations having so much history in terms of all the different systems that they've got, everything else like that, and trying to blend those into one, or when if we even start touching on openEHR and talking about what that was there to solve, you've got a lot of issues really where organizations are just nowhere near that yet because they've got so much to already do, and it obviously makes it very tricky. But there are obviously there's green shoots of hope, I think. Ian?
Okay.
Yeah, so as David said, so the reality is that the NHS is not one coherent organisation. In fact, within the UK, there are 4 NHSs, each of which has its different IT strategy. They share some of the same suppliers, but they are each country in the UK is independent. But within that, every single hospital, every single GP practice, every single other organisation, and there are many more, makes its own decisions about IT. Now, 12, 15 years ago, the government decided that they were going to standardise everything, and that just was a disaster. They blew £14 billion, achieved, well, actually they achieved more than people recognise, but certainly they didn't achieve anything like standardisation, and the applications that were built for that really didn't survive. But that's probably not what we want. I think the last thing that we need in healthcare is a single application built by a single vendor. It would clearly solve the problem you talked about, but it introduces a million other problems. One is just monopoly, which is never a great idea. The other is I don't think it is actually possible for a single application to cover the huge, diverse needs of many different kinds of professional, of different settings, of patients versus professionals, of physios versus doctors versus nurses versus cancer specialists and whatever. I think one of the really positive things, was the kind of whole, hey, we can build an app for everything. And I was involved in early stage with some open non-profits. How can we somehow take hold of the app revolution and make that we can fit the user experience to all of these different people in the way that's what the app revolution has done. The problem is what's happened is it's just become an app and a system which are it's even more chaos. So we have to somehow get diversity at the app layer, at the user experience layer, but built on a coherent base. So get the data layer coherent. And the only way to do that is to make that patient-centric. So that's, if you like, the last, I guess, 10, 15 years has been, how do we create that patient-centric data layer which cuts across organizations and, in fact, nations, but allows that diversity of apps to sit on top of it is where I believe we get to in the future. But that will be a 40-year journey. That's not easy to do, but we have to start sometime.
Right. So here I want to ask you a question. So, I think the patient-centric health record is definitely an important step in getting here. Um, but we've been at this for a long time, right? So people have been trying new approaches. People have been trying to solve the same problem in different ways. What do you think that uh, the previous solutions did not take into consideration, which we now know about? What is the key secret sauce, if you?
So I think two divergent attempts that have been made, which neither of which has succeeded. One is to say, look, let's live with all these organizational systems, each of which manages the data as well as the providing the user experience, and then let's just knit them all together with exchange methodologies, technologies, usually HL7, but there are others around. So each, excuse me, each organization maintains its own data store, and we move data between them, trying to get some kind of holistic view of the patient. Very hard to do. HL7 Fire has absolutely transformed that from being almost impossible to do to it's getting better. But I don't think that architectural approach, much as HL7 Fire is really nice to work with, will actually solve the problem because it's still the underlying architecture is wrong. So the other approach, which was, look, why do we forget about all this and we'll give the patients their records. Let's give the patients their records, and they will take feeds from all these systems and they'll stick them on their phone. And that is, philosophically, that's not wrong, but practically it doesn't really solve the problem because you just still get incoherent data coming from each of these systems onto a phone or a data store that was never designed to handle that complexity of data. And the patients themselves will never be able to manage that. It's just too hard. I'm now of an age where I'm much more a patient than a clinical person. And there's no way that I could manage the complexity of my own quite simple health journey experiences. So I think it's just naive. And I think what we have to get to is somewhere that allows patients to have their records, but they are actually managed in a clinical way. And it offloads that responsibility. And then we have many apps that sit on top of that layer.
Okay, so again, separating the platform and the apps into different layers.
To different layers. And the final challenge within that is that not everything is holistic. So I think the other kind of naive view that people sometimes come with it is just say it's just like a big bucket of data that you throw in and it'll all somehow sort itself out. Well, it doesn't recognize that the way that a renal specialist has to shape the record versus a cancer specialist versus a GP is quite different. At least parts of the record are very specific to that specialty or to that organization. And that's fine because the record has to work for them. And I guess the work that we've been, and David and I and others in our little outfit, the work we've been doing recently around care planning has been trying to tease out those bits that are genuinely global for the patient versus the bits that we need to manage in a tightly controlled contextual way, often because the people who know about that data are specialists, or they're orthopedic surgeons, or they're cancer specialists, or the renal specialists, and they know how they have to make their data work. As a GP, I have no idea. As a patient, I'll probably have a little bit more idea because I'm the one with the illness, so I'm actually arguably more of a specialist about this data than my GP. And they should be allowed to contribute to those parts of the record as well.
For sure. Yeah. David?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Ian had said there, really, context is king, really. Understanding the context of which it is you want to look at that data. So it's great having different apps sit on top of that, but being those applications need to be very specific for the use case of which it's being used. But splitting those layers up enables you the space to do that. And to actually use and review that data in the way that you need, even if actually you're all using the same data models underneath and being able to pick up the bits that you need in the way that you need them. So, and a lot of the work that we do takes into account having a look at and analysing that data almost strategically, really, and saying exactly as Ian was saying, how do we, which bits of this are global, which bits are needed in every single bit of those that you're going to need time and time again, but which bits are a little bit more contextual. And so what is it that we need to design in specifically for this particular use case, this particular care pathway, of which we're trying, what problem are we trying to solve? That's ultimately where we spend a lot of our time, and obviously we came up with CGEM for that, Ian, to try and sort of help us put things into a particular into particular categories that enables us to do analysis a bit easier. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about CGEM.
Do you want us to go there, Sidharth?
Sure, why not?
Probably easier if I share a screen at this point.
Okay, sure.
I'm just getting to the right page. Slowest. Someone else's. Yeah. So this came out organically through a couple of bits of work. One was actually a bit of work that David and I were doing together during COVID about we were trying to build a care plan, an app to support care home staff to how to handle or manage a deteriorating patient. So in the middle of all the chaos that people were having, and the clinicians wanted it to be based on a framework called SBAR, which is something that paramedics and emergency medics use. So it's situation, background, assessment, response. Some people might have heard of SOAP, subjective, objective assessment planning. SBAR is something, I think it came from the military, and it's right. Okay, what's the immediate situation? What's the problem? Headline, tell me what it is. Then you've got a few moments to sit back and say, okay, tell me a little bit more about this patient. Have they got any background history? Are there on any meds, any allergies? Then you make your decision, and then you do what you have to do. And when we were going through the design of that, we realized that, yeah, SBAR was a great clinical fit for, prioritizing information. But it actually started to mirror the way that we were capturing some of that information. So situation is that contextual bit. What's the problem we're being asked to deal with? Background is all the background history. Does the patient need care? Do they have a lasting power of attorney? Do they have any communication needs? All the things that they're nothing to do with the immediate situation, but it's things you have to know to manage the problem that you're dealing with. So out of that, we started calling this, there's an SBAR information framework, but then that confused people because it's not really SBAR, which is different. So we called it CGEM. So contextual, global, events and response and tracked, managed. Well, I can never remember. We keep changing the names.
Managed.
Managed care, yeah. So, and we took that we started getting involved in care planning projects in UK, and the one that's most well known is London Universal Care Plan. And we actually used that as a framework for deciding how we would divide up our data set, essentially, and the way that in openEHR we have this idea of templates, which are thematic chunks of data. And that's how we very much started to use it, and it's worked really well. So as an example, something like where do you live? That's background and global information. What meds are you on currently? That's background. Allergies, that's background. Events is different. So labs and imaging reports, they keep coming and they change and they go. And you're usually just interested in the latest version. So they're almost acontextual. If you have a raised white count, that is relevant whether you've got whatever condition you've got. They're not really contextually dependent. But then there are some bits of data that are all about the individual problems. So obviously in the Universal Care Plan, we originally were dealing with end-of-life situations. So things like, what's your prognosis? What's your preferred place of care? What's your resuscitation wishes? These are all quite contextual, and we thought we were originally. In this UCP program, we're now doing sickle cell disease. and that's most of that is also contextual. But on the sickle cell forms that we're asked to analyse, they were talking about we need to see allergies, or we need to record allergies, or we need to record the emergency contacts. These are global. You know, the personal contacts that you have are not part of sickle cell disease. They're things you have as a person. So we're now starting to see this as a really nice framework, which gets to the heart of this idea of a patient-centric record. And how do we start to frame it in a way that doesn't interfere with people doing their jobs, which might be quite specialized, but maximizes the reuse of information across these boundaries?
Right. So I think here the CGEM framework for universal care planning, it's great. But before we dive deeper into this, for the audience, so would you like to explain what a care plan is and what is a universal care plan?
Oof, oof.
Whoa, whoa. So I'll talk about care plan, and then I'll let David talk about what the idea in London of the universal care plan was. I don't think there is such a thing as a care plan. At least it is a meaningless phrase because so many different professionals actually apply a different meaning to it. I much prefer to say the thing that binds it together is it's actually managed care information. In other words, there is something about this person's life and their circumstance that means we need to manage their care. We're not just reacting to whatever events happen. And almost certainly as part of that, whether it's a social worker recording a needs assessment or a renal specialist recording a treatment plan, there is most of what's in these, what people call care plans, is actually just curated information, curated and managed. So somebody's saying, to do our job, there's a set of information that we want to collect and keep maintaining. On top of that, some professional groups have, if you like, goal-orientated care plans. So typical, this sort of nursing process is all about, yes, there is a care plan, but it's all about what are the goals and the tasks. Yes, that's certainly kind of, but not every care plan has directed goal tasks. Some of them do, some of them don't. I think what binds them all together is this idea of it's about managed care, and it's about managed care information, the information to support that, which is usually curated. So the information itself is managed as well as with care being managed. Dave, urgent care plan to universal care plan?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we've been involved in that, having a look at all the different data elements that are associated with it, from the urgent care plan that included things like, information regarding frailty and dementia and, demographic information. And obviously what we were involved in there is saying, well, how is it that we take all this information and put it in the context of the different people who are going to need to look at that? And the urgent care plan specifically that we were looking at was having a look at each of those different elements and having a look at the About Me section, for example, and understanding specifically for the patient the information that's important to them, and breaking it up into lots of different areas that were relevant for each different context. So if I remember rightly, Ian, when we were working through that, we did break it up into the About Me section was one of them. I think there was other contextual areas regarding the management of the care plan, as well as other observations that were taken as well. So we were things like I say, any of the different assessments regarding dementia or frailty. Allergies were obviously taken from a global point of view, as Ian had mentioned before. And our role in that was to try and, from the patient's care plan point of view, was to split that up into each of the relevant sections, each of the relevant templates that we felt were appropriate for being able to record that data and being able to retrieve it in such a way that it made it maintainable in the longer term. I guess some of the issues that we saw there was that actually a lot of the information was being either reused in in different ways across each of those different contexts. And obviously we were there to try and make some of that data, where it was used in such a way for things like the global data, for example, making sure that was available for each of those different templates in a particular way. So I think certainly in the work that we did, Ian, there was a lot of analysis went into reviewing each of the different forms that they already had, that they were already using. We made sure that we were covering things like the advanced treatment decisions, where it is that they would go, how it is that they were managed, understanding that it's not just a case of recreating a form and hoping that that would sort of solve the problem. It absolutely doesn't. It's about where it is that sits, who's got responsibility for it. Understanding, for example, the activities of daily living so the different observations that would take place and where it is that you would store those within the context of the patient's care journey. And again, in terms of the urgent care plan, having a look at other understanding, for example, the primary diagnosis and where it is that you would add that versus other problems that may exist within that patient's care. So there was obviously a lot to take into account in terms of the care plan, but it absolutely spans across a wide area and lots of different individuals needing to get involved in that, and from lots of different backgrounds, not just clinical, but there's obviously care backgrounds there as well to support that, and making sure that everyone was aware of what each of those different elements were. And obviously when we've modeled that, making sure that we've done it in such a way that it's going to be repeatable and not become something that's obviously really big and unwieldy.
Okay. So I think
Yep. You gone? I was going to say one of the
for the audience first. So we are trying to achieve, the urgent care plan as a template in the data repository, which every single app has access to, and everybody is on the same page about what a particular patient's urgent care plan is. So although there are different NHS institutions and they are divided in terms of the data infrastructure, this particular project, and again, we'll talk more about the OneLondon initiative and exactly how all of this comes together. It's a way to sort of say, this is what an urgent care plan is. This is the data model for an urgent care plan. And this is how we've modeled it. And again, they've done it using openEHR templates. All of the, now again, I would definitely like to know, how did you push the different institutes to really start using this and start sending data to urgent care plans? But before that, Ian, yes, go on.
Yeah, so maybe know a little bit of history, because this didn't come out of nowhere. There was an existing product called Coordinate My Care, which was, and it's a complex, it's not just about CPR decisions, cardiac resuscitation issues, but let's just use that one data point as a critical bit of information that everybody needs to know when the patient becomes ill. What is their wishes at the end of their life. So that's the core of it. And so CMC was quite successful. It had been going for about 15 years, but it had two problems. One is they were finding it very difficult to get it to communicate to other systems, and it wasn't well integrated with. Imagine, a city the size of London has, hundreds of different organizations. I don't know how many GP, there's probably about 100 different GP practices. There's probably 20 different hospitals. And then, they couldn't get it to connect very easily. And the other was that the people who built it realized that, yes, this is primarily for end-of-life care, but we want to use it for other things. We want to use it for diabetes and epilepsy and all these other things. And they couldn't grow it and expand it. So at the point that the CMC contract came to an end or was up for renewal, they said, we want to look at something different. You asked a very good question. How did you persuade, or how did we persuade? Well, there is an existing pan-London NHS organisation called OneLondon that exerts a fair bit of power. So that was the NHS using its power as a community to say, this hospital, that hospital, GP systems, we are going to make this thing available to you. Two methods. One is via embedded web forms. So there will be a web application, and it will be built in a way that you can very easily embed it inside your own systems with single sign-on. And that was a huge bonus. That just having that layer of technology meant uptake was huge. But the other was, because it's built on openEHR, everything is available through an API. And we won't go into that today, but fundamentally, all and any of the data is available to any of these third-party systems through APIs directly without going through the web app. That's probably more for the future, but we're doing a little bit of data exchange directly. But it's quite surprising, actually, how immature those other systems are in terms of taking that data. Their ability to take it and integrate it into their systems is really very limited. And you can imagine this is the chaos. If we said, this is just another system holding CPR decisions, and we've got, maybe 100 systems? So we update our CPR decision, you have to update yours, you have to update yours. What if that synchronization doesn't happen? This is critical information, but this should be only held once in one place for the patient. And there's many other things like it. And this is the mindset that we're trying to get to people. There is a place for a patient-centric record, particularly for critical data that everybody has to know about. Let's put it in one place, and let's make sure everybody else has access to it. Let's stop shuffling it from one application to another, because we're never going to get that right.
Got it. I think that is the core of this whole initiative, and making sure that that data is in the right place and is accessible by the right people at the right time.
Yeah. Now, of course, who gets access to that, and on what, there's a whole governance layer that has to happen. And I think one of the messages that we probably can share is, one of the critical things once you get into this space is your role access, identifying staff and other people who have access to the system, and clearly identifying their roles is really, really critical. So you need very, very good staff identity, because that's where once you've got this data store, then not everybody should have access to the whole thing. It needs to be granular. It needs to be within their competence as professionals. And one of the other things that we believe is that patients should have access to this, not just to read data, all of it potentially, but to write some of it back. And again, we need to make sure that we've got good patient access controls there as well.
Absolutely. So how did OneLondon even notice something like openEHR? And how did this actually, a government body thinking about a proprietary system like, I don't know, as it's happening right now, it seems to be the trend. How did OneLondon set a precedent in adopting a standard like openEHR to actually model the data and actually implement this in live? And I don't know how many patients are live on the system right now. Can you tell me a bit about the story? How did this come to be? What happened? How did you really implement this?
Well, so I think some of the senior people who were involved in this re-procurement were aware of openEHR, and they were probably quite friendly to the idea. But in all honesty, I wouldn't say they knew it in huge detail. But the company that we were working with, Better, have some really nice low-code tools, which probably sold the idea in general, some nice modern UI that was extensible. And I'm sure, given that they had the vision of this universal care plan and they wanted to go many different ways, they could see some attraction there. But we think the thing that probably swung it was, as part of their procurement process, somewhat unusually, they decided to have a hack day. So they invited all of the companies who had products or, APIs or whatever to rock up for a day and build something to showcase what they could do. And although we were not the prime contractor, we got involved in that hack day, working with some of the clinicians and people around, showing how we could extend openEHR to build those new data sets quite quickly, and then get them built into the FHIR form builder area. And we like to think that had quite a big impact on the final decision to go with what we eventually did.
Showing them actual working products and prototypes, and showing them in record time how you can build these forms must have
Yeah.
definitely blown their
So
minds.
we just said, look, give us a new use case. So a GP in that community said, okay, well, I want to do something on frailty around a thing called the e-frailty index, which I knew vaguely about. So we built that with him. So he gave us and we worked with the openEHR tools. We built it into a data model. We built it into a template. We put the template up in the design space. We built a form, and we had a little working prototype, probably within a morning. Now, life is way, way more complex than that, but at least, we could showcase the flexibility and adaptability that we can have.
Right. So after that, how did it switch out from, you showed them that this is possible, there is a prototype. What were the complexities involved in once they decided that they actually want to go with openEHR? What happened then?
Yeah, so that's when the trouble starts. When you showcase what you might be able to do, and they tell you what you are going to have to do. So what we were asked to do was within 7 months. So we had a 7-month tight deadline. In fact, originally it was less than that. I think we originally had about six months. From a standing start, we had to the whole outfit. This is not just us, but the whole procurement. We had to extract the data from the old system, or at least get the extract from the old system, understand the data models, because we had no understanding of the data models, build new openEHR data models to be the targets for those, obviously do the mappings and the technical conversion of that data. So roughly 50 to 60,000 live records, which we couldn't see. So because this was live data, real and anonymized, we couldn't see what the real data looked like. We were only ever given example data anonymizations. In credit to the company who were passing this on, who lost essentially, InterSystems, they actually did a really good job of documenting their data models and providing us with good extracts, and that was nice to see, because it's a sort of place where things could get a little gnarly, but they were actually very good and played it very straightforwardly. But still, it's quite a complex data set, and so our job as freshEHR was actually to be that clinical informatics bit, understand the source data, the target data, and to advise the developers who were doing the migration. And then there was a whole form building bit that we had to do on top of that. Actually, we passed that over to someone else because it was just too much work to do for us. But yeah, Dave, you'll remember those happy days of building mapping spreadsheets.
I certainly do. I love a good spreadsheet, and being able to map it across on there. Obviously, by the time we got to the end of it, we had a really efficient process for doing it, and then obviously it's like, okay, we're done with that now. What's the next bit? But yeah, it was that was exactly it. And like you say, I mean, obviously credit to the company that we were working with. They did document it well for us, and it did make that a little bit easier. I think once we'd put in we got our sort of template set up for how it is that we were mapping those between that system and openEHR, the models that we'd actually developed for that. We got into a bit of a groove with it, I think, by the time we got near the end of it, Ian. And it was hard. It was hard work in terms of it was a long slog, but obviously it went really smoothly. I think the thing is that at the end of that, when actually we did some of the testing of the data, most of it went through. There was only a few errors and snags along the way, but the majority of it went through fairly well, I think.
Yeah, I
don't know if you
credit to others.
Can you remember?
Credit to others. I can't remember the numbers, but there was a really, because this had to work from day one, so it wasn't a case of, we've got a bit of time, it had to be at the stroke. I think there was like 6 hours downtime where the clinicians were told, look, between 12 midnight and 6 a.m. this thing's going to be offline, or at least there's an old copy. It's not necessarily completely up to date. And that was just the time to do the last data feed, because these feeds actually took a long time to go through. And we had a really clever schedule that one of our colleagues devised about how we would do a first big cut and then smaller cuts as we cut down into, and we found some problems as we got through the real data. Some things did fall over. We had unexpected, because this original application was like 10, 15 years old. There was a lot of crappy data in there that we didn't know was there, and actually the people who were advising us didn't know was there. So it was not surprising that we had some snafus, but we had a good system and we had a really good relationship with the other guys who were other companies. So everybody was very understanding when either they messed up or we messed up, and we just got on with it. It was a really, at the end of it, it was a really good experience.
That's beautiful. That's an action movie packed in.
I was in.
Yeah, we had action movie sort of music going in the background the whole time we were doing the data mapping.
Yeah, they might wake up anytime now. It's 6 a.m. So that's beautiful. So I think you took the legacy data and then migrated it to openEHR compositions finally, and then you had to also model these templates, and then finally you pushed all of this legacy data. That's beautiful. So what was achieved? So at the end of it, what did we achieve?
So first of all, we got the data safely over, and that was our primary concern, because this live working system that people were relying on, and they trust, and we couldn't drop that. We couldn't afford to get that wrong. So that was one. The second was that the numbers of good outcomes so the big problem is, particularly the ambulance drivers or the paramedics didn't know what the patient's wishes were. They were confused about what the patients wanted. That, the measurements that we've had, people are accessing it more, and that's partly because of the single sign-on, the embedded forms, and not so much about the content, but it's being used more. People are creating, like ambulance guys are consulting them more often, the GPs are consulting them. So that's gone very steadily. It will improve over time. But then the next phase is to add in, and we're just about to get the next deployment is, okay, so this is not just about end of life. It's going to be about frailty. It's going to be about patients with dementia. It's going to be about patients with sickle cell disease. Also patients with complex communication needs or behavioral needs, people with learning disability or neurodivergence disorders. And they have a really bad time, because they hit a scary, messy care system. People don't know how to look after them. They don't know that when they're clutching their arm, that means they're in pain in their stomach, or vice versa, and it drives their carers crazy, because they're having to tell yet another group of clinicians all this long, complex story. And I think this is going to be a huge bonus. And to be honest, we could all be there one day. This obviously applies to some people from a very early stage of their lives. What are the things that really matter and make a difference to you? What do we need to know about you? But one day I'll be there, whether it's through dementia or just some other serious illness. And one of the phrases we in a similar project that we ran, people were doing a kind of user-centered design. They were talking to patients and relatives, and one of the things that one of the relatives said, we don't really quite get this as an end-of-life conversation, because our loved ones are quite young, they're otherwise in good health, they've got all these complex needs. This isn't information for death, but it is important. It's information for life. So we grabbed that as a kind of, much of what we're doing is to try to make as much of this information that is about you and everybody needs to know about you, is get that in one place. And that's what's been great in the universal care plan, because 90% of the information, the extension of that, was not about any one condition. Sickle cell was the one thing which had this contextual information. nearly everything about dementia was not about dementia. It's about how dementia affects your behaviour and your communication. Same for learning disability. It's not about the LD itself, not about the autism, but about how it affects your ability to run your life with strangers. So high value coming
I
up.
think that is the key stuff, isn't it? So we could obviously sit here and talk about efficiencies for each of the organisations of being able to access that data and being able to, or not need to necessarily do all these different integrations and all this other sort of stuff. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when we're having a look at it from certainly our perspective, is that there's patients at the end of this who are now going to get better care because actually people have access to the data without repeating this stuff every single time, which is, I know we touched on right at the very beginning, of needing to repeat your story, and you're giving the key information across to everybody's got that in front of them, and being able to actually make some of the conversations and provide the care that that individual needs. And just like Ian said, that that'll be all of us one day at some point. I would like to think that particular journey is going to be easier for me and easier for my family, assuming that this is a model that other people take on and walk with.
It's also, I mean, I do strongly believe that we need, almost certainly every country in the world will end up re-architecting their data to be much more patient-centric. But that is hard. It is really hard. Trying to take a complex hospital system and redo it, or even a GP system in the UK. These are complex entities. That's not going to change right now. What's nice about this patient-centric record idea is you can start with those quick wins and easy wins, because none of these systems handle this kind of truly patient-centric global information very well at all. It's all peripheral. It's all stuff that's collected by a nurse at the start of the admission, then it's dropped on the floor when the patient gets discharged, and then they collect it all again. So, I think both in terms of the informatics and also the commerciality, these companies who are building these things, they don't care about that stuff. That's on the edge of their interest zone. This is something that we can forge ahead, start to rebuild or re-architect our health information systems around the patient without going head to head with the big acute systems, going head to head with the big American, the Epics and the Cerners of this world. It's a nice place to start to make the change.
Yeah, it's like nobody else.
And that's it. I mean, you said this was a 40-year project, right?
40.
40, yeah.
I'm not joking. I think this is I'll be long since dead. Yeah.
Coming back to, when we have the openEHR data repository in place and we have the data in place, OneLondon is going to have to carry on regardless of the team that works on it, right? So how are they going to transition from, let's say, your team handling everything today to tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it has been challenging. Again, this is perhaps, I'm not sure if the UK is unique in this, but when I started in this world, there was a fairly strong, at least technical teams within the NHS, within, if you like, the health service providers, the people providing services. And even to some degree, there was quite a lot of informatics expertise. But that's all gone away. So there are not many people within NHS organisations who have the kind of deep knowledge that we've managed to gain. And that knowledge, for me and for Dave and colleagues, it's just come from working in this space. It's not because we're smarter people. It's just because that's what we've been doing, in my case, for the last 15 years. So it's knowledge that you can acquire. It's hard to learn it or teach it directly. An awful lot of it, you have to live it. So the challenge for us is, how do we gradually get that capacity into the NHS or equivalents? Because I do strongly believe that shouldn't live in vendor companies or in consulting companies like ours. It should be within the healthcare providers. It's their stuff. Now, they will buy apps and build apps, or they might buy data stores or other tech. But this information layer is such a critical part of their business, whether you're a commercial healthcare provider or national as we have. This is their business. They are the ones who should own and manage the data models and the business logic that goes around that. That should be within their capacity to manage and maintain. And then, yes, commercial entities can come in and make the magic work on top of that. That's my vision, but that means NHS or health service people basically being able to do what we do. And that's going to take some time to upskill them because they just don't have the knowledge and skills at the moment. And I literally just came off a call with one of the London people showing how to write AQLs, archetype query language, to generate alerts out of the back of the UCP. And I'm pleased to see she did a great job.
This is the thing, of course. So we're talking about a new approach, and it's as more and more organisations and individuals become aware that the information model is the important thing. Really, the data is the important thing. The application and the technology that sits on top of it, and how it is that you persist that data in terms of the technology that you use, is more and more commodity. That stuff has already been solved to a certain extent. The hard bit is actually the information models, and unfortunately, I think a lot of that is knowledge. It is. I think we say all the time on our team that, and I know it's becoming more and more like this, Ian, but it's sort of less. It's less science and more art, and to do some of this stuff. And obviously, teaching that is fairly difficult. But as with any new type of, whether it was a new technology, a new language, a new whatever it is, the uptake of that will come naturally. The more that obviously more organisations begin to care more about the data that it is that they're modelling and how it is that they want to manage that information layer. So I think as even though there isn't necessarily a lot of people looking at it going, well, this is new, and it's like, it's not. It's been around for ages, openEHR. But actually, what we're talking about here is clinical informatics, and about people understanding how it is that you shape the data, how it is that you are going to reuse that data and make it so it can be reused. And a lot of that is for all that we're providing the advice and guidance now. Organizations, the more they do it, will obviously become more comfortable with it. And I think over time, and certainly we've seen this uptick in take up of openEHR, lots of different organizations now going down that route, but from national scale through to smaller SMEs picking up on it, and they're all wanting training on this stuff. And because it's new, you're having to provide that level of mentoring, even whether it's different training or mentoring. But over time, that's ultimately where they'll get to. And like I said, I don't see this as any different from any other new bit of technology where people don't know what that looks like, and ultimately, you won't, because it's to you guys this is new, and that there's lots of other people out there who've been doing this for a very long time, and now it's just a case of saying, how do we disseminate that knowledge across all these different places that are wanting to take it up, and ultimately it as with everything to do with openEHR that I've observed, this is more of an evolution. It's a slow sort of change, as opposed to a huge revolution, everything just being big bang, loads of money thrown into it or anything like that. This is very much an evolutionary type of approach to getting different people on board with being able to do that clinical informatics piece.
Given that freshEHR has had so much experience and you've been doing this, do you have anything that the audience can use or look at to upskill themselves on openEHR?
Oh boy, depends what you're looking at. Your material's fantastic. You're the master of doing this, and we're all learning for you. Yeah. We've started provided commercial video training courses. That was really as a reaction to trying to do Zoom-based training is almost impossible. So, and we found that has been quite a good experience. Definitely one of the places I'd urge people to go to is openEHR Discourse, because I think there's a very friendly community there. People will answer whether it's a clinical informatics problem or a technical one. And there's a few of us that make every effort to try to respond to people, because we were there one day going, what the heck is all this about? I think to some extent, I think the biggest challenge we have is the mindset. People come to it thinking, oh, where's the openEHR application? Where do I download it and build it, or where do I buy it? There is no such thing. Where's the schema for the database? There is no schema for the database. So it challenges people who come at it, whether it's from a clinical idea or a technical idea. It just doesn't work with the way they think. The way they're not used to thinking in the world this way, and that's why it's been quite challenging. I think we still need to do a lot more in terms of educating people on what it is and what it isn't, particularly on the technical side. I know you agree. It's not as hard for engineers to use as we say it is. It's just because the current specifications and the current documentation is not pitched in the right place.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put down links to the openEHR discourse down in the descriptions below. Anything else that I should maybe the audience should check out?
Yeah, lots of, if you can dig out all of the various presentations at openEHR meetings, there's lots of high-level stuff. There's some great things on clinical modelling from people like Heather and Sylvia Backa in Norway. So there's lots of material out there. We probably need to do a better job of curating it and tidying it up so people can access it.
Yeah, I think the things that have really helped me that were at the time. So obviously we like Ian says, we've got our training, and what we tend to find is that the bit that really helps people out is the mentoring beyond that. And it doesn't matter who you're getting that off if you're working with people who have done this, as I say, because it's not science, it's like more art. So working with people who have done it and why they would do it in that particular way, and the more exposure you get to that, the better, really. But one of the things that I found really useful, certainly if you're going to be looking to take the models that you're developing and putting those onto the international CGEM, is the style guide. So there is a style guide out there for how it is that you would do that, just to, if you're taking those things through an approvals process. So even having a look through some of that documentation that is, it's there on the openEHR website. And essentially that'll guide you through how it is that you would complete an archetype, so that it met that particular standard that they're expecting when it goes through review. And I think that type of stuff's really important when you get to that level of, we want to submit this thing, we want it to be reviewed by our peers across the world. How do we do that? And it's like, okay, you need to have done it in this particular way. And sometimes if you get to that point and you've not done it that way, you're like, oh, I've got a load of work to do. I've got to go back and go do that. So it's useful, I think, to maybe get some of that information beforehand and actually build them from the start in that way.
Got it. So I think if you're building
two documents might.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to maybe finalise, two documents that people might find helpful that are at a higher level, and they're not specifically about openEHR. Both published by the Aperta Foundation in the UK. One's called Towards an Open Platform, or something like that. Open Platform Aperta, you'll find it. So that was written some years ago by some colleagues of mine, and I think it just sets out the high level patient-centric architecture, separating data from the apps, how we can base these on open standards. I think that helps orientate people as to what it is we're doing. And I know that document was, for instance, very influential in Catalonia adopting openEHR and the open platform approach. They certainly told us that shaped their thinking quite a bit. One that's less well known is the idea of co-produced records, and I was one of the co-authors on that. I think that's yet to come. I think this is the idea that if you've then got an open platform idea, why wouldn't we let patients be able to see everything that's in there, but more importantly, start to contribute back to their data stores very carefully, only in places that it's safe to do so, but essentially treating them as co-professionals. In the sense that as a GP, I can't contribute to an orthopedic surgeon's operation notes, and they can't contribute to my notes. There are lots of other places where we can co-produce these records. We can both update problem lists. We can both change allergy records. Patients are no different. There are things that they can do, things that they can't do. But the most important thing is that data is all stored in a medical, legal, safe way. So they can't just delete a record any more than I can just delete a record. Treat the records as being professional, but allow patients maximum access, maximum distribution. And I think that's an idea that will start to take hold over time.
Yeah, I think so too. I think like once you enable the technology that makes it possible, patient co-record ownership, practitioners using their own applications, it's just it starts to make more and more sense. It just explodes into the use cases.
Yeah, the other thing in that is that people say, well, we don't need to do that. We'll just build we'll just build apps for patients, and we'll build the records that, and then, but they tend to have such a simplistic view of what patients will want to record. Oh, they'll just want their apps, their problems and their meds and their allergies. No, if you've got cancer, you want to know the details of that. If you have renal disease, you want to know what your electrolytes are and your fluid balance and all the other stuff. So, patients, when they get sick, become like professionals in a really thin slice of medicine. There are things that they need to know in their record that are absolutely critical to them. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
But you then put these all side by side for every single patient with every single condition, you've got an entire EHR. You've got to be able to handle any kind of data that's in a professional EHR mirrored into a personal one. Why would we use a different technology? Why not use the same technology and the same governance rules? In fact, why don't you just make it the same record and make it all about governance rules?
Makes a lot of sense. I think let's see what the future holds. So thanks a lot, Ian and David. I'll definitely put the links that you all mentioned down in the description below, so you can check it out. Anything else that you want to tell the audience before we part?
Enjoy. It's hugely challenging, very intellectually rewarding to get through this stuff.
All right. So definitely. So enjoy we'll put a lot of documents. Please go enjoy. And so thanks again for taking the time. So bye-bye.